Patrick Doyle, Manager of Environmental Communications for Outboard Marine Corporation, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Mr. Doyle is a graduate of Marquette University College of Journalism, and he's a member of various public affairs committees with companies in the trade associations, snowmobiling, boating. He's a member of the Public Relations Society of America, and he will talk on economic and environmental impacts of the boating and snowmobile industries. Mr. Patrick Doyle.
Could you help me with that?
Yes.
I'm not sure exactly how this... It's just a tremendous opportunity being here on behalf of industry. We heard of General Motors. Is the fellow from General Motors here? Is he here? He's left us? I thought that, unfortunately, he spoke a little bit too much about cold, hard product to our group, and we're here, Earth Week, Environmental Week of 1975. And many of you, it's a marvelous opportunity on the college campus, I think, to tell you of the social responsibility that is set in at the corporate level in this country and that has progressed since Earth Week and the whole environmental movement in this country started in 1970. 1 second first. Marvin Rosenman, you've really put together a first here in the world of leisure and environmental concerns. And unique people like yourself are always attempting to come up with something new and exciting, and so are we in the public relations and advertising business. It reminds me, in Milwaukee, I was involved in a cancer crusade fundraising activity in the industrial community. And we had Bob Hope coming to Milwaukee to help generate fundraising activities. And we'd been promoting a lot of things. Of course, by the time Hope was going to be our coup de grace, the final activity that really topped off the fundraising. And we'd been busy, so I contacted United Airlines, public relations and publicity people, and said, please come up with something new and unique and different around which we can secure some more local publicity for Mr. Hope's arrival. Much like Marv, he created it first. Well, the lads at United wrote the following letter back to me, and I want to share it with you. I think it's delightful. Dear Pat, the publicity staff of United Airlines has reviewed your request that we come up with something new and unique to generate additional publicity on Bob Hope's flight to Milwaukee on United Airlines for your fundraising activities. We think we have some unique plans. See if you don't agree. As the United flight carrying Mr. Hope on his nonstop flight from Los Angeles approaches the runway in Milwaukee, the captain will violate all safety air regulations and make a very dangerous, skillful crosswind landing at the airport after buzzing the terminal. As Mr. Hope deplanes, our United publicity staff on cue will simultaneously release 10,000 pigeons, which have been dyed alternately red, white, and blue, our corporate colors. The pigeons will then form into the shape of a giant 747 and fly over Milwaukee's downtown area, dropping as they fly promotional literature keyed to your fundraising activity. The birds will then return to the airport in time to rendezvous over the field with a special United charter flight carrying a contingent of U.S. Army paratroopers. The troops will bail out over the airport, scattering chrysanthemums over the assembled guests. Simultaneously, a mixed chorus of 50 Sioux Indians from Wounded Knee, South Dakota, will sing, "Your land is our land," United's TV theme song this year. Following this stirring melody, Arnold Palmer, United's house golfer this season, will begin driving multicolored golf balls from the fuselage of the airplane. As the last ball is hit, the paratroopers will be landing in a pattern resembling the United States shield trademark and raising appropriately colored pom-poms that they've been waving while descending. Then a trio composed of Gloria Steinem, Jane Fonda, and Eartha Kitt will sing God Bless America, while the 10,000 trained pigeons form a giant American flag hovering over Bob Hope. Following this stirring number on cue from, it's shortly finished. Following cue from our staff, the blue pigeons will leave the flag formation and spell out Milwaukee, while the red and white birds depart from formation and fly to Green Bay, Wisconsin to take part in a gala civic farewell ceremony to ex-Green Bay Packer coach Dan Devine, sponsored by the Citizens Committee for Better Football. The lads from Notre Dame, I don't mean to poke any fun. I thoroughly love Dan Devine. I think he'll do a great job down there, but he had a thankless situation in Green Bay. The crowd at the airport then will be invited to enter the terminal, where Miss Steinem, Miss Fond, and Miss Kitt will don maid costumes and serve the guests a delightful repast of RC Cola and moon pies. We hope these plans meet with your approval, and my reply back to them, to their tongue-in-cheek plan was, Dear Tom, your plans for welcoming Bob Hope to Milwaukee and generating additional publicity for us is simply great. It's just that it's been done so often. Well, Marvin, we haven't done this very often here, and we congratulate you.
I appreciate your comments on Bob Barrett. I don't know what to do.
You know, really, back in 1970, if you would have had this, I don't know that there would have been too many corporations that would have been willing to accept your offer and come here and talk about their environmental accomplishments. Because admittedly, back in 1970, we had a lot of problems. We still have a lot, of course we do. But we've made some remarkable strides in those 5-year periods. You know, when discussing environmental issues, my company makes engine-powered products. Nothing is any more maligned in this country than an engine-powered, the two-cycle engine. Our activities are all keyed to recreational activities using engine power. We're surrounded here with the extreme environmental activities, the non-engine powered, the sailing, the kiting, the glidering, and that's as it should be. We should have these choices. But, you know, in dealing with outdoor leisure activities and the engine-powered product, I think it's the underbiting philosophical premise underlying this subject may aptly be compared to a compromised position between the contradictory views expressed by that famous character W.C. Fields and Carrie Nation pertaining to popular, age-old, and still misunderstood beverages. Fields, of course, operated under the contention that if a little bit is good for you, a lot is wonderful. Carrie, you will recall, flipped the coin and followed the precept that poison is poison, regardless of the amount or circumstance. With a little license, it is easy to further the analogy and equate the segment of the public which needs and requires outdoor recreation, perhaps with WC, and those who want all lands and waters to be put off limits because of possible environmental degradation from the engine-powered product could be associated with Carrie and her philosophy. Either position really carries the real and present twin danger of oversimplification and subsequent overreaction. Let's just quickly, we've had some people talk on the need for leisure and recreation in this country, and we touched that point heavily yesterday. I had it in my remarks. I just want to touch a few things if I can search them out here. Two hallmarks, really, of our current society, namely the rising curves of discretionary income and discretionary time available to the public today has really brought about this whole recreational explosion. Here are some interesting facts I think you'll find. Personal incomes in this country now exceed $1 trillion annually. That's $1 trillion. That's a gain of over 50% in the last 5-year period. And more than 40 million Americans now work under conditions of employment entitling them to at least 3 weeks of vacation time. In addition, a federal law on holidays, which became effective in 1971, provides 3-day holidays for a goodly portion of our people for 5 3-day weekends throughout the course of the year. And early retirements, of course, we mentioned that yesterday, have spurred more leisure time activity. Recreation spending in this country, wait till you hear these figures. Recreational products, equipment, vacation spending, the second homes, summer homes, recreational trips and the like, in the United States, excuse me, contributed more than $105 billion to our economy last year and employed more than 4 million people. That's 1 out of every jobs in this country are involved in the recreational tourism industry. Here are some examples of what that $105 billion package means. Leisure spending for the first time in our history is now exceeding our national defense expenditures. It is more than the total outlay for all new home construction spent annually in this country. It is twice as much as the total of our nation's entire corporate profits and far exceeds the overall value of our total exports annually. And of staggering importance, some economists are predicting that the total annual dollar volume for leisure spending, if we're blessed with a decent economy over the next 5 years, is going to more than double. It's going to double itself. 210 billion, they're estimating, by 1980, blessed with a good economy. It's of additional interest to point out that dollar totals in sales for recreational products have increased by 60% over the last 5-year period. And 75% of our people, age 10 and above, are involved in some consistent form of outdoor recreation in this nation. That need for recreation, we talked about it. There were several quotes yesterday. I had a few that I'll tick off. One of our great sociologists and philosophers has said that leisure and labor are 2 sides of man's shield. One labor enables him to live, while leisure makes the good life possible. And Aristotle, in his treatise Politica, said that, in fact, we labor to have leisure. Margaret Mead probably went to a great extreme when she said that recreation is something done to get you safely back to work again. And when recreating, man, for that brief period of time, can become master of his own life. Dr. Alexander Reed Martin, who is the former chairman of the Leisure Activity Committee of the American Psychiatric Association, concluded a recent report with this statement, quote, "Perhaps man gives himself more and more free time at this period in history because he needs it to meet the challenge of our rapidly expanding inner and outer worlds." Having noted all of these things, a fact that is very little publicized in this country, and yet the Department of Interior will verify it, is that 74% of the public in this country live on only 1.5% of our land. Thus our extremely urban-oriented society. Get out into the woods and recreate. But we've been also spending millions of dollars to bring our products, our engine-powered products, up to snuff environmentally, and to safeguard our waters and our lands and our air in which they operate from the detrimental effects of environmental impacts. The boating industry. Against this backdrop of $105 billion, a quick glance at boating. There are 19,000 firms in this country engaged in producing some form of marine recreation. There are 16,000 dealers and 3,000 manufacturers. I'm sorry, there are 19,000 firms involved in it. 16,000 of them are dealers, marine dealers across country, but we have 3,000 manufacturers of marine products. Provides jobs for 500,000 people. Sales exceed $4 billion annually. And our payrolls exceed $2 billion. The value of all engine-powered recreational boats in the United States represents an investment of $15 billion in assets. And in 1973, marine exports were about $150 million. But more importantly, 47 million Americans each year go boating at one time or another during the summer. I was going to give you, just picking out a state, my home state of Wisconsin, for instance, to show the economic impact of recreation. Let's say boating. We have, and this is not, we're ranked about 9th in the country on the list of popular boating states. And we make 85% of the recreational marine engines. Our Evinrude division, the Mercury division of Brunswick Corporation, Chrysler Marine are all in Wisconsin. We employ 12,000 people in those plants. Wisconsin has over 375,000 boats registered in the state. And to show you how valuable the state is as a recreation and tourist attraction, another 300,000 people have registered boats there. So that means 750,000 boats are registered in a state of only 4 million people. So that's why we react vehemently, I guess, in the boating industry whenever we see any unreasonable legislation prop forth. We descended on Washington 3 weeks ago for 2 consecutive weeks because, whether or not many of you know it, the energy bill that is being proposed by Al Ullman's House Ways and Means Committee had a suggestion in it on excise tax that snowmobiles and outboard engines, and those were the only 2 recreational products selected. The House Ways and Means Committee wanted to tag a 20% excise tax on those products. When you consider that the marketplace is really middle America in boating and snowmobiling, 87% of the boaters in the United States make less than $15,000 a year. With those increased fuel taxes, and God, we're making engines, we've poured a lot into making them more efficient. Gasoline taxes are going to go up maybe to $1 a gallon, the total price tag for gasoline someday in this country. We feel that certainly we're happy to pay our fair share, but that 20% excise tax being imposed discriminatorily upon boating, we thought was disastrous, because it's just enough to turn that average middle American away from boating, and he'll take up some other form of recreation and put a real thriving business community out of business. I was going to give you a couple of economic facts on snowmobiling, but I'm not going to. You here in central Indiana don't realize what it means to the snow belt country, but it's fantastic. Tim from Canada, it's one of the most popular outdoor forms of recreation up there, and it's just another way that we have in the snow belt areas of expressing our recreational activities in a time of the year when we were pretty well limited up to the advent of the snowmobile 8 years ago. We get back to that fuel allocation argument, which we were, by the way, fortunately successful in trimming or getting the House to vote against after they heard our economic facts and our appeals. I can't help but refer to a statement made to our boating and snowmobile industry representatives at a press conference last year when Bill Simon, our Secretary of Treasury, was the energy czar. During the crunch, he said that concerning fuel allocations, we are going to deal with the entire, and I emphasize entire, recreation industry in a fair and equitable manner, because leisure, recreation, and tourism to certain states, and he was talking about that northern tier and that southern tier, the Sea Pines area in Florida, because leisure to certain states and areas is as important to those as some of the basic industries in this country are to other states and areas. Tourism is number 2 industry in many of our states, a little known fact. On the subject of fuel, quick, it may be of interest, those 47 million Americans that I mentioned that go boating use less than 1/2 of 1% of our nation's total petroleum consumption. This amounts to 880 million gallons of the 102 billion gallons consumed by all engine-powered mobile sources in the United States each year. And that's about 1/4 of a tank of gasoline for every car in the United States. That's a small amount of fuel to punish and exclude a given industry. The snowmobile industry consumes 1/12 of 1% of our fuel. That's 80 million gallons. The point in presenting all these economic facts is that the recreational activities are vast and multifaceted. To deprive the public of these activities would be grossly discriminative, and the economic consequences for all of us providing recreational products would be disastrous. And I don't think that it's fair to take that choice of recreation away from our fellow man. Now to the 2-cycle internal combustion engine. You know how it's been under the gun since 1970, and rightfully so. The damn thing has polluted. Great strides have been taken, and it's not an easy, there are no simple answers, I'll tell you. It's estimated that just in the car industry, in the next 5 years, it's going to cost $30 billion in our struggling economy to meet the clean air standards. Auto firms are going to be spending $16 billion to produce the emission control devices that will meet the clean air standards that we have today. There is controversy over those standards. Did we race into them a little bit too quickly? Is the catalytic converter the answer? Some feel that the cure is worse than the disease. That issue is now being hashed once again. But it's going to cost the American public another $14 billion to keep your automobiles and your catalytic converters or your emission control devices working efficiently. And you're going to be spending, those funds will include maintenance and additional fuel consumption and to meet these stringent regulations. So there's a tremendous sharing between industry and the public. The man on the street is going to be carrying a goodly slice also. Although we have really in our marketplaces, snowmobiling, outboard engines, power mowers, we have not yet been mandated by environmental regulations. They're not on the books yet. We're on the list to be considered, and it's forthcoming. But we don't have a air, water, noise regulation as such on the dockets, but nevertheless, since long before 1970, but since that time we've spent millions to make our products environmentally acceptable, and when these standards do face us, we're going to be able to meet them. We're confident of that. We've been dealing, we in the environmental end of things have been dealing with Washington, the Environmental Protection Agency, on a weekly basis, and we're optimistic that however stringent they become in the noise area, the air emission area, and I'll tell you right now some of the things we've done. But the underlying factor of all this is that you can't stay in business today in this country and not be socially responsible. Our marketplaces are made up of the who's who, really, of the corporate world. Firms that make a broad, diversified line of products beside recreational products. There are firms like John Deere and Brunswick Corporation, AMF, Textron, Massey Ferguson, Chrysler, Yamaha, Suzuki, Arctic Enterprises, or my own firms, Evinrude & Johnson Division, the Lawn Boy Division in the mower business, just to name a few. So in order to we know the value of clean water and clean air, noise-free environment, and we in recreation, we love it that way, because if we don't have those attractions in our markets, we're going to lose those marketplaces. In the outboard industry, we started long before Earth Day began in 1970. Back in 1952, at the University of Michigan's Water Resources engineering activity, and we've been doing it since 1952 there. We've had studies going on because we've been concerned about the effect at that time and up to the mid-60s. If any of you are outboarders, we had the overboard drain. You saw the slight stream of fuel being deposited into our waterways. It was a minuscule amount of fuel. It was about a shot glass full, they figured, extended over 1.5 miles of waters. It was biodegradable, the tests proved, the extensive tests that we funded at the University of Michigan. In a short period of time, this fuel slick on the water was biodegradable, and it was never really determined to be detrimental, but for aesthetic reasons, we didn't like it in the outboard industry. And in 1964, we came out with 40 horsepower and higher engines, became what is known as drainless technology, where we were probably the first of the recycling people in the world, where we recycled this overboard drainage back into the crankcase fuel back into the engine and burned it efficiently. But we had difficulties with the low horsepower engines. And in 1971, announced to the world that we had solved the 40 horse and lower engine problem. And so the complete line of engines are today, and have been since 1971, completely drain-free. And because of our environmental concern at Outboard Marine, and we were one of the first in America to have an official environmental affairs department. We established it in 1970, right at the outset of the environmental crusade. And as an environmental first, we offered that technology to every outboard manufacturer in the world. And so I'm happy to tell you that the European and Japanese firms are also featured. So that's one stride. The environmentalists in the early 70s said, we don't give a damn about the studies that you've been doing at the University of Michigan. Our friends at Mercury Marine had a lake in Florida where they did a lot of their testing activities. They call it Lake X. They hired one of the leading Florida water research consulting firms, and they did extensive tests on this Lake X. Thousands of gallons of fuel were poured into that test lake with their boat testing, engine testing activities over the course of a 2-summer period. And the research, again, proved that it was a negative impact on the aquatic fish life and biological organisms existing in the waters. But the environmental people in the country said it's a self-serving study because industry paid for it and industry is publicizing it. So in 1971, we went to the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, the government's most authoritative body on environmental matters, and we laid all of these studies on their desk and said, this is what we've done. We don't think we're a problem, but please, you fellows, design the parameters of the study, select the consultants, study lakes in the cold water part of the United States and in the warm water parts, and tell us if we're degrading the environment, we'll take strides. So they picked fish hatcheries owned for years by the Department of Natural Resources in the state of Michigan, never had been exposed to an engine-powered product in their life. They took 4 of these. There are 4 adjoining ponds. One pond they would stress the dickens out of with the old drained engines. Another pond down the way would have the drain-free, the new engines. And then the 2 in-between ponds were the control lakes. The same fish life, the same water, the same biological communities were put into all 4 bodies of water. And then we took a lake in Wisconsin, which is considered to be as close to saturation boating as you can possibly humanly get, on a 4th of July afternoon. We had took all the data that the DNR had on the lake, and we determined how many millions of gallons of gasoline were burned over that Labor Day or Memorial 4th of July weekend, and we tripled that amount to a situation that is saturation. You could almost walk from one boat to another if you had a boating situation like that, that is the amount of exhaust emissions we were pumping into these test lakes. We did the same thing in Florida, so we could judge warm water lakes as opposed to cold water lakes in the north. At the end of a 3-year period, the final conclusion of this report will be coming out sometime in early summer. The conclusions are that the minimal impact that we do cause is harmless on all of the organisms and the water qualities. And we just think it's the study to end all studies. And with the same thing we did on the exhaust emissions or air emissions, this was the water quality study. We've done the same thing in San Antonio with the Southwest Research Institute, all under the auspices of the Environmental Protection Agency. All we did is give them engines. They took it from there. They selected the outside consultants. So they designed the parameters. In the area of noise, the Office of Noise Abatement Control, a couple of years ago, sent a letter to President Nixon and said that of all the engine-powered applications in the United States, the boating industry has done the most to quiet their internal combustion engine. We've, at various boating lakes in Wisconsin, we are continually receiving comments from the non-boating public. There's the element, of course, the sailors and the canoeists and the rowboaters who want that body of water for themselves. They want to ban outboards, and they've used the noise issue and the pollution issue as charges, and we're able to refute those now. We've gone to some of the most popular lakes in the Midwest and set up our noise apparatus on the shorelines. And at Lake Geneva, this last Labor Day weekend, interestingly enough, because there are very few, the noise measurements in this country are all set up at 50 feet measurements, and it's seldom that you're really within 50 feet of another boat when you're skimming across the water or fishing. So we think that the real impact of noise would be on the non-boating public, the shoreline resident. So we set up all of our noise meters at various key points, well-traversed points on the lake. And I'll tell you, at the shoreline recording station, the noise level ranged at the highest in the low 60 dBAs, which is quieter than the conversation in an office situation, across the desk type office situation. Such things as boats washing against the piers and birds chirping in trees and the church bell ringing in downtown Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, gave, while recorded at the noise meter on the beaches, was far louder than the passing motorboats that are recorded all day long. So we think that there's a point beyond which, really, at times, it's impractical to go in certain environmental areas. With the engine shut off on an outboard engine, a tow-by test, you put a 200-foot tow line, and with the engine shut off and going past your noise meters at 50 feet, you get a decibel reading of about 74 decibels with the engine off, and with it on, at 50 feet, it's about 78 dBA, so it's hardly harmful. In that snowmobile area, there have been studies that we've done also on the impact of the vehicle itself on the vegetation which grows beneath the snow cover. The vehicle itself is a flotation device which really exerts less pressure per square inch on the Earth's surface than does a human being's footprint. I think it's 2.25 pounds of pressure for a human footstep, and it's a half pound per square inch from the flotation device, the tracks of a snowmobile. And the studies down there, they took plots of various type grasses, and they saturated all of these grasses with hundreds of runs of the snow vehicles. Next to them, they had control plots where none of the areas were exposed to snowmobiling activity. And the vegetation, the yield in the spring of the year, the summer, was equally as impressive from those areas that have been heavily traversed as opposed to those areas that had not been exposed to snowmobile pressures. Same thing with noise. They've done extensive studies, and it's too extensive to get into here. But let me tell you that we've studied the effect of the vehicle itself on wildlife, deer, rabbits, on human beings, and have concluded that, well, the machine itself has been quieted by 85%. Admittedly, in 1970, it was a raucous, damn machine, and it was up about 103 decibels, I think, at 50 feet, and miserable. Today, it's down to 82 decibels at 50 feet, which is a decline of 85%, and it's going to be down to 78 dBA next year. And we get down to that about 74 dBA figure is as low as is humanly possible, because the machine with the engine shut off and towed by, the chatter of the skis and the nuts and bolts and rattle in the unit are as noisy as with the engine on. So we are in favor of those who want a more intimate relationship with nature. The canoeist, the backpacker, the skier, hiker, the sailor. And we think that there's just, with that 74% of our public on 1.5% of the land, there's just an ample amount of out of doors, water and woods available to the recreating public if we practice wise land use management. Motors deserve their place, and so do the extreme environmentalists, and that's as it should be. All we ask is that a realistic sense be brought into, well, I'll tell you, the White House recently warned Congress about the fact that there may be some advancements made that may not be really worth the minimal amount of improvements that they bring to the environment. White House warned Congress, saying, realistic, quote, realistic sense of what it will cost to achieve our environmental goals, and to choose a specific level of goal with an understanding of its costs and benefits is one of the key issues in Washington. We can reach our pollution control goals, but let's read all the data. And if something is out of whack, if the outboard engine has something on that data that is environmentally degrading, let's have courage enough to clamp down on it, and then have a commitment and pursue that commitment to solve that environmental problem. Our industry's product is people's enjoyment during their recreational hours. And to repeat, our business is really the quality of that recreational experience. It's up to us as manufacturers of these products to see that today's youngsters riding their tricycles on their streets will someday find that their adult recreational vehicles will carry the same passports to a greater leisure enjoyment, and that these passports will not have been invalidated because our generation did not act when there was still time to do so in these critical environmental areas. And on behalf of the boating and snowmobile industries, I think that there's been just a commitment to excellence all across the board, and we just feel that we're just not going to stay in business in this country unless we're committed to solving these problems. And you can't market a consumer product today with the extreme consumerism regulations, the safety regulations, the environmental regulations. If you're not channeling your best talents into solving these areas, you'll be out of business. And how long have I gone, Mr. Russell? Much too long, huh? All right, 2 minutes. One conclusion, please, and on a college campus, I'd like to make this comment. Last week, when President Ford kicked off the bicentennial celebration in Concord, you know, you had about 20,000 young college students on the other side of the bridge who were campaigning and demonstrating, and it was against one thing, it was against big business. And as they called it, its adverse influence on the American way of life. There's a great misconception, I think, among the young people and the educated young people and a lot of our public in this country, which was exemplified by that throng at Concord, which contends that the American system of free enterprise and capitalism has provided unlimited profits to big business, and that we've got an unholy alliance with government and are really controlling them. And I think that nothing could be further from the truth, really, in this day and age, I'll tell you. A young man lives next to me, goes to Duke University, and said that they refer often in an economics class to a textbook called Up Against the American Myth. And the first line of that book reads, "Capitalism stinks. We can only solve our social problems by doing away with capitalism and the institutions that support it." Now, our youth complain about big impersonal government, that they are, and the young people are determined to lead their individual lives, and God, that's great. And yet there's a prevalent myth that our public's paying heed to, that and various political and economic experts are saying that who offer government controls and over-restrictive regulation as the only proper way to protect against big business. We've been banged away ever since the 1972 political campaign that a mistrust to the American business institutions. And why shouldn't they? Because for several years prior, capped by the 72 political campaigns, the public had been subjected to comments such as 40% of the business community, 40% of the corporations in this country pay no income tax. And that's absolutely right. 40% of them don't, because they're not making any profit at all, that 40%. And that has been recorded in the last 20 or 25 years, these 40%, and these were good economic conditions. I dare say what it might be this year. But the top, all of business in America totals 5.5% in profit earnings in America. And the top 500 corporations, which employ 76% of the public and make 79% of our products, are averaging a shattering 4.2% in profit return in 1973, a good year. So please, the public with government as a representative has served notice that the lion's share of our cleanup bills are going to fall on the shoulders of industry. And we're happy to do it. We can't do it all overnight because the profit picture is not quite there. And the efforts to solve these problems are going to be complex, but the effort and dedication of not meeting them is just unthinkable. So let's really not risk contributing to a time when you'll be forced to face your children or your children's children when they put the question to you, what were you doing on the day that free enterprise and capitalism was lost, perhaps, in this country? And a little less government intervention. Let the free market flourish. We'll get along fine in this country and solve our problems. And I thank you kindly.